All right, can I coax you back to your tables? It's already that time. We're late.
I'm gonna put my phones up there. Is that all right?
Yeah, here, you can.
Thank you, sir.
Does one of these a burner phone?
No, one's an angiophone. FDA, 10 years, you have to keep all the records. Is that what I'm perfect for? Good. There we go.
So thank you very much. We're gonna continue to work you and leave you better off for the process. So I'm very pleased now to turn to the kind of the piece of the puzzle that we have not yet addressed, which is the role of our education partners, our higher education system in New York in this workforce space. And I'm very pleased to welcome Shadi Shahadapur Sandvik, who is the provost in charge for the State University of New York. She is SUNY's chief academic officer and is responsible for driving academic access, success, and excellence across the SUNY system. Among her mandates, she is charged with transforming academic programs and policies to meet growing research and workforce needs. I will say, as someone who spent a number of years working at SUNY, one of the things that I've found most encouraging in recent years is really a widespread approach change at SUNY, a growing recognition of the role that our public higher education system plays in connecting our communities to workforces and the success of our community. So I want to thank her and thank SUNY. And I'm also pleased to welcome Leonard Johns, who is the founding dean at the Lewis School of Health Sciences at Clarkson University. Len leads a growing portfolio of programs in the health sciences at the university, encompassing both undergraduate, graduate, and research programs. As a private national research university, Clarkson is a leader in technological education and sustainable economic development through teaching, scholarship, research, and innovation. Len is going to be our voice on behalf of the private higher education institutions here in New York. And moderating the panel is one of my favorite people, Salim Cheeks, who is our vice president for communication, is the vice president for communications at AngioDynamics. In addition to corporate communications, Salim's background includes leadership roles in advertising and as a spokesman and deputy press secretary in New York's executive chamber. Salim is also a member of MedTech's board of directors, and he serves as the chair of our government and public affairs committee. With that, to our guests, thank you. Salim, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Wen. You're one of my favorite people too. So, good afternoon. I want to start off by saying, and no offense, Dean, proud SUNY alum. So I'll start with that. From SUNY Oswego, right? There you go. We talked about today, right, industry perspective. And we went into the government perspective, and now we have the benefit of talking about the perspective from the academia. And this is, one of, if not, a key piece of the ingredients that we need, and we think about workforce development and how we train the next group coming in to the workforce. And so, really excited to have you here today, and really excited to have this discussion. And I think as we saw throughout today's discussion, each one of these segments has mapped into the other, and we were just talking about that, and I thought that was exciting. So why don't you start off with giving us a little bit about yourself, and what is it?
I think it's probably, it's working.
Yeah, all right.
Okay. So, hi everyone, it's great to be here, and I see that some folks, they have, all right, more power to you. It's after lunch and everything, and people are still awake, so that's a good thing. So I'm Shadi Sandvik, I'm provost in charge at SUNY System. I have been with SUNY family for a long time. This is my 20th year of being at SUNY. I started as a junior faculty with the College of Nanoskills Science and Engineering, and moved up and I'm a researcher. I still have 5 PhD students. I have a couple of postdocs, and I work in semiconductor technologies and all that. And along the way, I also kind of veered into administration, and that's really how we affect change, right? To just make sure that we are at the table, and if we want to see change, that we are part of making that change. I have been chair of my department, and then dean of the graduate studies and vice president for research, and started at Suny system as the provost in charge about 13 months ago. So it has been a fantastic ride, and it's really great to really just see the breadth of our campuses, as you know, Salim, very well. And just for some of you who are not Suny alum or they are not connected to Suny, Suny has 64 campuses. We do all the way from training PhDs to be innovators and leaders to community colleges, to comprehensive colleges. So we really run the gamut, and that's the fantastic thing about that Suny as really a microcosm of how you can affect change, because we have almost 1.5 million students. So it's a pretty big responsibility to have, and we take that pretty seriously. So I'll stop at that.
Perfect.
So Clarkson's not quite that big. But my name is Leonard Johns, and I've had multiple, phases of my life. Undergrad, I was a product of a state school as well, so so I have that experience, and then I went on to do my PhD in cell molecular biology, studying MS in healthcare. And then went on to a pharmaceutical, so I know some of the business side into kind of pharmaceutical discovery pieces, and then I got back into education. And education mostly in the health sciences, right? Looking at training healthcare providers in what those students need when they get out into the workforce, right? Small story about Clarkson, right? The Lewis School, we're new about 1.5 years ago. And part of the way that the school was founded was we had an engineer, Mr. Lewis, who graduated from Clarkson a number of years ago. He met his wife at Potsdam University, and then they fell in love. They got married. They went out and traveled the world and owned a bunch of businesses. And their family, right? Her family is from the North Country, and they bought their first house there, right? Not the Lewises, but the ancestry back in 1802, right? So they've been there for quite a while. And one of the things that happened was that when the Lewises, the younger Lewises, not the 1802 Lewises, right? They had relatives that were living there and they had some health issues. And in the North Country, from a healthcare point of view, they didn't have the ability to diagnose and treat, right? So they brought their relative to I think it was Boston, and some of the hospitals there said, oh, this is easy to diagnose, it's easy to treat, and they did that fairly quickly, and so that's when they realized that healthcare, there was inequities in healthcare in rural settings, and decided to take some of their finances, some of their money, and put it back into development in an education sense. So that's kind of a short story of how the Lewis School was founded, and kind of the purpose, right? And I've had a couple of conversations with both Lewis, and part of their purpose in founding the school is to try to develop a model where a university can work with local healthcare system and the community to develop something that's integrated and special to that community. So that's kind of the founding of the school, right? And so part of my job is to figure that out, right? So have some ideas, and I'll share some of those as we go on today. But just that's the context of where the Lewis School currently is, what our philosophy is, and then kind of what some of our longer term goals are, right? And Mr. Lewis he's like, I want you to be the model for the country, right? And so he's very big thinker, right? And so it's not just the model for New York, right? Rural areas, but he wants us to be the model for everywhere, right? So that's my task, little task, right? So I got to get busy.
I feel bad having you come all the way here. You sound busy.
I got time.
So 64 campuses in the Suny system, 100 private colleges and universities in New York State. together, I think that helps make New York an attractive place for businesses and industry to want to locate, right? But how do you think about, how do both sectors think about, preparing the population, the workforce, for what the needs of a changing industry might be? How do you think about that when you think about curricula and programs and training,
You want to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So obviously we look at our mandate more than really, we look at the industry, we look at our colleges and where they are located, and there's a saying that within 30 miles of any New Yorker there's a Suny campus, which could be true. With 64 campuses spread across the state, that is probably true. So you can kind of just see these colleges and universities being really the heart of their community. So we look at Suny as community building. They are really, some of them are the heart of their community, and obviously their health is going to be dependent on how they are interacting with their community. And creating jobs and making sure there is social mobility, it's very important. Our community colleges in particular, they work great with industry because part of their mandate is also workforce development. So you will see if you have ever kind of looked at some of the community colleges and what they do, they have a lot of programs from micro-credentials to certificates to even the 2-year degrees that they design. It's around their interaction with industry, with the communities that is around them. Now this could be a pull from the industry, what it is that they need, or it's going to be the faculty or the program approaching. And again, it really runs the gamut. But, and then you go all the way to our university centers, right, which are much bigger. So you have University at Buffalo, which again, its reach is wide. Its workforce development or interaction with industry could be local, it could be global. Now, how programs come about? Programs are really bound to the type of faculty that you have, how you grow. So it's not like something on a dime, you can change the type of program offerings that you put in. So these long-term relationships and the pull and push, this is very important dance that they all get engaged in. But again, just because of what our mission and what our mandate is, we look at the whole spectrum. So maybe Len, I'll let you kind of get into, because I mean, I feel we are very fortunate in New York with the type of educational institutions we have. And one thing that I feel like maybe we need to do a better job of is just a closer collaboration to make sure that we are responding to the need of the state as a whole. I mean, globally, but also the state.
Right. Yeah, I would say right now there are different products out there as far as doing research, and I'm sure most universities are doing it, things called packages or services called Burning Glass. Burning Glass, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and pretty much all universities are using those couple of things to sit down and look at where workforce needs are, what those predictions are over the next 5 to 10 years, and then trying to build, or at least talk about building programs in those areas. So that's something that we've done, and then the other piece that I'm sure most universities are doing, especially in specific areas, right? Maybe not across the entire state or across the entire country, is then going to, at least I have, right, gone to local employers, gone to the healthcare system, and said, okay, this is what the national data says, right? What is that true here? And if it is, which ones, which kinds of programs should we focus on first? The good news and the bad news about that, right? The good news about that is it gives us a starting place to look for, for what kinds of educational programs to design. The bad thing about that, and I'll give one example, right, is if you look at the programs in physician assistant, right? If you look at programs of physician assistant over a 10-year period, they're expecting those programs across the country to grow by about 81 to 83%. Right, which is good if you say like, hey, we can produce that many more professionals, right? The challenging part, and that's where we have workforce issues, right? The challenging part of that is that right now, right, there's not enough physician assistant educators to staff that many programs, right? So as we look at, trying to work with, from a healthcare point of view, trying to work and develop the kind of workforce that's needed, we also have to think about our development of workforce at the same time. And if I went down through, the top probably 20 programs that end up on that burning glass and on the BLS data, that's probably true for most of them. Is that there's that secondary workforce issues that as a educational institution, right, that we're struggling with to staff.
If I may add to that, I think one of the things that we do at Suny system for our campuses, any program that needs to be developed has to come for approval and then SED and if it needs to be. So one of the things that we do is that market analysis, helping the campuses, some of them that they need, with market analysis within the programs that they want to create. And that's almost, as you were saying, Len, it's just looking and trying to predict. This is the need today, and try to predict, that this need is going to continue to happen. Now, there are two, or for example, you would also want to assess students' interest to be absorbing, but that's really not very, it's not very reliable, just because, student interest today could be very, with students these days, it could be like tomorrow they could kind of change their mind, do something else. But that's very important to kind of just look at that market analysis, just make sure that programs that are being developed, that there's actually a pull for it. Otherwise, they require resources, especially if it is in very new areas. For example, many of you may have heard, some of you may have heard about the push by the federal government under the CHIPS Act for semiconductor microelectronic. And that is very important. If we just look at the chip shortages, for example, even just cars and things like that. So why is that the problem? Because many of these manufacturers, these industry, they have offshored. They have gone out of the country, right? So now we don't have the workforce. So it doesn't almost, not that it doesn't matter. We can create a lot of innovation. We can create a lot of technology. We can have the design. We can have all of it. But if we don't have the workforce to actually be able to implement, or we don't have the faculty, so you need to be able to implement. And I think what you're saying is exactly that. So we know that there is a need, but the speed at which we can react to it does not respond to that need. Hence, the importance of this long-term planning and long-term thinking. So even though business has the need today,
right,
how quickly we can respond to it, that's a different question.
And can I dig into that a little bit more, right? You talked about the partnership, the need for a long-term partnership with private industry. What does that look like when it's done right? Do you have any examples or from your perspective?
Yeah, so we're working on a concept right now with our local healthcare system. And the concept is, what do they need? What do they need now? How long will it take us to develop the pipeline of students or workforce to do that, right? And some of it comes down to a continuum. They're looking at a continuum of care, right? And we're looking at a continuum of engagement of people, of potential students, and an engagement along a continuum as well, right? And what I mean by that is that, and there were other speakers up here today that talked about we need to look at the K through 12 system, right? And we have two long-standing programs, one funded by the federal government, one funded by the state at Clarkson, that looks at STEM, right? And trying to get students that are grade 8 through 12 basically either in after-school programs engaged in STEM or in summer camps, week-long summer camps engaged in STEM activities, right? To say, hey, there are these possibilities. And I think the other piece of that, right, is not just that there are these possibilities, but if you look at a place like the North Country, we have, a very different demographic and socioeconomic situation where we have a large population that is, would be first generation going to college, right? And from that, how do you take that population of students, right, who their parents and their grandparents haven't been in, haven't engaged in some of the, college education, haven't engaged in technology, and introduce them to that in number one, but also give them a sense of belonging, right? And what I mean by belonging is that they can see themselves as 8th or 9th or 10th graders, right? Is, hey, this is a field where I know I enjoy it and I potentially can do it, right? So that's the first part of the continuum. We're writing a grant right now to look at doing the same type of a program with healthcare, right? So trying to engage high school students in here are healthcare issues and here are healthcare professions, right? So that's the first part of the continuum. The second part of the continuum, if we look at statistically across the United States, about 80%, 70%, somewhere in there, of college juniors change their major 3 times, right? So we have students going in. So the importance of that piece of data, right, is that a student may know from a high school situation that they want to do STEM or that they want to do healthcare, right, but they're not exactly sure what yet. So the important piece there is designing some freshman and sophomore level classes or curriculum so that they can explore a couple of different possibilities and be able to still make a decision by the end of their, say, a sophomore year, beginning of their junior year, and still have a career paths, right? So kind of on-ramps and off-ramps of educational pieces, right? But even there, if the students don't have the experience of being in the hospital, right, or being in a healthcare situation, how are they going to know what they really want, right? So this is where some of the collaboration stuff is coming in that we're working on, is working with BOCES to try to have them possibly come into or do some type of educational things within some of our college space, right? So that a student can go, hey, I've never been to college, but this is what it's like, and I can see myself here, right? And educating on that front. The other piece that we're looking at is having some of our freshmen and sophomores who know that they want to do healthcare, but they're not sure what yet, right? And this comes into workforce development. So have BOCES come in, develop, provide certifications of 3 or 4 different versions of that, depending on what our healthcare system specifically needs, and then working with our healthcare system to say, hey, you can't hire somebody at 40 hours because that person doesn't exist, but we have students, right, who are certified in these various types of things, and they might be able to work for you 1 day a week, right? So instead of having 1 full-time person, you have 4 part-time people. And what that allows for is that allows for the student to get into the healthcare system and look around and say like, oh, I like that position, but I would never do that, right? And gives them a little bit of experiential learning to say, hey, I can see myself here, right? I have a certification, I know I can accomplish it, and that's one of 2 things that I want to do, right? And then being able to make sure in the junior, senior year that we have that educational piece in line so that they can have on-ramps onto the kinds of professions or certifications in healthcare that they're really looking for.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I think I would probably just, so we, again, I think just because of the nature of Suny, because of our different sectors, we look at this.
Right.
Depending on which sector is getting engaged with it, I mean, it can be different. So we look at exactly that our juniors and our seniors and freshmen, just making sure that they have these opportunities to interact with industry and kind of get to know these type of careers that they may or may not be interested in, but also upskilling and reskilling, which is a very important. And that's, so businesses, I mean, we have to kind of look at long-term, but also short-term. Business has needs, the industry has needs, but how do we respond to that need? And that I would say, I love this word co-designing because it's so important. This co-design that you sit with the industry partner and you understand what it is that they actually do need. So we want to make sure that, for example, let's say at the community college level, or at even our comprehensives and many of our doctoral, we want to understand that we actually, the programs that are being developed, there's need for it, but how do we know what those needs are? So, for example, you talk to IBM and they say, we need computer scientists, we need folks that understand what AI is. And now we see like AI is in everything, right? It's not just in your designing a chip, but you want to kind of do, I know marketing, you need AI, you want to do healthcare, you need AI, everything you do, you pretty much need to at least understand and has applicability. But being able to really respond to that need, how do you do it? You do co-design, you interact with industry, and hopefully they are open to tell you what kind of skills they really need. And I think that's another tricky part of it, right?
Sure.
That over time, not to have too much change, because again, as an academic institution, you're designing a program around it, which means you're putting resources towards that. And that, so this has to be a way that people are collaborating and they're trusting each other, that there's this pull and push, that it is not just the industry looking at, or the business looking at their bottom line only, but that they also look at this institution as a partner, and that's how things can survive, and this partnership can survive, where they are actually kind of just really, truly, they are collaborating with each other. And we have great examples of it across the state. And I think those are really the models just in terms of them benefiting each other. A really good example, not to necessarily kind of, in Western New York, there are some businesses that they work very closely with some of our community colleges. And we recently had conversation with them. And they love the students going out of this, and they wanted more of it. So what we put forward to them was, it's fantastic, but let's come together, and expansion requires resources and long-term thinking. So let's just kind of just look at that together, right? So I think it's important. But I wanted just to say a couple words, if that's okay, about upskilling, because that's, I think, is very important. Micro-credentials are really important, as many of you may have heard. I think it's really important for people, like what you said, Lynn. They get into probably a profession, and they figure out after a couple of years, it wasn't good for them. That's not their passion. They really want to do something else. But they don't want to go and get a whole new degrees and all the debt and everything that comes with it, right? Financial investment. It's great. Take a micro-credential, whether it's for credit or non-credit. Suny offers a lot of, my goodness, we have like 400, I think it's 450 micro-credentials in all sort of stuff. A lot of it, 70% of it is for credit. But take your micro-credential. Is it good for you? Great. If it's good for you, maybe take the next step. Have a pathway that kind of build it. We have micro-credentials that builds to a PhD, to a medical profession and all of that. So I think just thinking about this holistically, and I think at the end of it really is collaboration. I think you said, I mean, how do you collaborate? And that's a collaboration, making sure that we understand each other's needs.
Perfect. One of the topics that have sort of flowed through each of these segments today has been diversity.
Yes.
Right. And even at a board meeting this morning, topic A, right? That just triggered a thought in my mind, this micro-credentialing. Do you view that as sort of maybe a potential pathway to get more people engaged, those marginalized communities, that, another way to give them some mobility?
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, I want to make sure that I say it again. I mean, we see as our mission impacting people's lives. It is great that social mobility is very important. It's really in the fabric of Suny. How do we enable folks to kind of get to the next step and the next step and next step? And micro-credentialing is really one way. So let's say if someone is from underserved community, right? How do you get those? I mean, there's the social aspect of it, which is very important, but also if we just look at the economy of scale, right? We have so many people, so many students, so many folks that they really don't see themselves in a profession for all sort of reasons, right? So how do we enable them? And they can be great at it, but they really just need that first step. Suny recently, governor announced completely waiving the fee for getting transcripts.
Yes.
And that's very important. I mean, we may not think about it, but it's really important. When you have your transcript on hold and you can't really go for the next thing or apply for a job, just for small amount of money, you impact somebody's life in a very profound way. So micro-credentialing, again, is a very, I don't want to say low cost, because even that can be costly, so it's really important to have even micro-credentials to have financial aid for micro-credentialing, but that's okay. I mean, that's the next step. But for the credit, the ones that are micro-credential for credit, they can get financial aid, which is important. Get the micro-credential, and then that way, at least you can build to a certificate. And now you have the certificate in hand. It gives you mobility. There are, even industry, there are companies that they give badges. So it's not just Suny. I think a lot of universities and industry, private, that they are doing. I think it's a fantastic way to get a lot of people involved. And I tell you, we really need, I think we just don't have enough workforce. We really don't. And we have a lot of people that don't participate. in the type of needs market economies that healthcare is one, semiconductor microelectronics is another one, which we have huge need, and there are some communities that they have some universities that they just have never seen themselves participating. So I think that's a great way of doing it.
Did you want to?
Yeah, just echo that, and I think, back to the concept is we need to be able to, as educators and also employers, right, be willing, and this was also said, in two of the other two sessions, we need to be willing to think of alternative routes, right, and alternative credentialing for people to get into jobs, right, and not just say all the time, we need somebody with a master's, we need somebody with a bachelor's. Here are other skills that this person we hope has when they finish a bachelor's, right, or a master's, and identify what those skills are, and then look for those skills in the application process. So interesting.
Right, and it is holistic, really. I mean, so then can I give you back? So I mean, you got your degree. I'm going to milk that as much as I can.
Milk it, no.
But so you got your degree in political science, right?
I did, yeah.
Okay, but that's not what you do today.
It is not.
It is not. But it's all these other things that come about around it. You had the opportunity to experience other professions, and you found, but your liberal arts degree helped you get there. So I think this being, I go back to micro-credential, and I go back to internship and apprenticeship, and just being able to provide students and work and our labor market, our workers with this possibility of experiencing a wide variety of things and facing challenges. I think a lot of our students, they really don't know how to respond to challenges. They don't know today, you need to work in a team. So this whole idea of how do you function in a team can be very challenging for people, right?
It can.
Yeah.
And it feels timely, right? The talk throughout the pandemic was leveling up. Everyone leveling up and trying, whether it be a LinkedIn course or something like that. I think this is so timely to see this come about. That's great. So you build it, right? You build the program, you have the partnership, but will they come, right? The population decline. How do you deal with that? I know there's a number of members in this room who have manufacturing facilities and locations of the state, but the population is just not there, and it's just not going to come back anytime soon. I don't care if you cut taxes, they did anything, people just don't want to live there for whatever reason. So you build these great programs, and you think about the pipeline and getting these talented people into it so that we can hire them. How are you addressing that? I know it's affecting institutions, both private and public. How are you guys thinking about that?
Well, first of all, is Dominic still here? Or did he take off? I want to propose Canton and Potsdam as the fifth center of development, right? So we'll start there, right? One of the interesting programs that we've started, or I guess scenarios we've started, is within the School of Health Sciences, we've incorporated a corporation, a company, right, called ICOR. And it was stationed originally and still has some of its facilities in Syracuse. But what we're doing there is they're in the School of Health Sciences. They're going to be doing manufacturing all the way from molecule identification to the biophysics or the biochemistry physics of molecules, looking at how to design crystals and then also drugs that meet that molecule in the way that it needs to be, and then all the way through the production of that molecule into pharmaceutical development and animal trials and so on and so forth, and hopefully getting that to a place where we can actually deliver some types of novel drugs out of the Lewis School, right? But the interesting piece there that we're focusing on is in many academic institutions, what happens with a PhD student, including myself, right, is you go in and you learn a lot about one piece, right, of the puzzle. But what a lot of people coming out of PhD programs don't know is they don't understand the process from molecule discovery to manufacturing and delivery of drugs, right? So within what we're thinking about with the I-Core piece there is that, yes, we're going to have PhD students focusing on specific pieces, but also educating them on what the entire process is, all the way from drug discovery to clinical trials to approval from an FDA point of view, right? So as those students come out, they have an understanding of what their science is, but also the manufacturing process. Which is a pretty cool idea. The other piece that we're going to be doing that's with the scientists, right? But they're also going to be learning the business piece, looking at a model both at the undergraduate level and possibly with the School of Business, is that we would also take some students in the business realm and also at the undergrad and grad level and educate them on how to be a CEO of a company, right? And how to think about being a CEO or a chief science officer of, and the cool thing is that they're not going to be reading textbooks about that, right? Because they're going to be in the company, doing it, and meeting with the CFO and meeting with the CEO, meeting with potential investors, and so on and so forth. And what their idea is to also bring in not just I-Core as a manufacturing piece, but then also to bring in a number of other startup companies that are kind of shelled under them for additional opportunities. So that's how we're trying to transform just the education into the education and the application of that into what you guys are looking for, right? So.
Do you have any thoughts, Shadi, around population as well, around the challenges? Serving on one of the Suny boards, it just feels as though the net keeps getting wider. We need to reach further, which is fine. It's just...
It is, but I think we obviously, we were given a not mandate, but definitely that's the drive. Governor recently, in her State of the State, put a challenge to us to increase our enrollment by a pretty substantial number.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, that's a challenging thing to do. Because if we just look at the population of New York, right? Population of the graduate students that are graduating from high school. You have to kind of really put all these realities together and say, okay, so how am I going to impact that? And for folks in the audience that you have businesses and you're looking for your workforce, but then you kind of see that actually dwindling, and now you're thinking about, okay, so how am I actually going to keep going with folks? They live in California. How am I going to attract them to come to upstate New York and stay here? And with all so we have seen all of it. I would actually look at this a bit more holistically. It is not just the academic. I think we need together to be working with our communities, because people, when they move into to work for a company, right? So students are different from workers. Students, they are really kind of almost like they are very engaged with their school community, and especially if they are a graduate student, they are pretty much, that's their life. They spend their life within that university or college that they are, and after that, you're hoping that they will stay and contribute to the economy of the state. But for undergrads, the same thing too. But it is really a pull. If somebody's coming, joining a company, for them, where they live, what they do, what is around them, everything becomes very important. So it's not just the job that they are coming for, it's the community that they are coming for too, especially if they are coming with a family. So I think that's where really, I feel like folks are doing a really good job, but maybe that's where we kind of have to, I know that the state and the local government, this is something that's kind of like in front of their mind always. How do we create a community that people come and they want to stay? Now, whether it's from our K through 12 schools, or it's from the entertainment, all of that, it all really has to come together. As for Suny, we need to, again, expand, or the pie needs to get bigger, which means that the students getting out-of-state students, international students. These are all very important parts of our population that we just really, again, the reality is demographic within the state and then outside of the state. And online, I want to make sure that I say this. We need to kind of be realistic. This last 2 years of pandemic, a lot of us have gotten used to living here and working in California, right? So we need to kind of think about these modalities. And even for some of our students, a lot of online, we have at Suny, we have this fantastic program, Suny Degrees at Scale. And this is where we make sure that the degrees that we offer online, they are very in line with the market, where really the economy and the workforce needs are. That's how we expand it. These are supposed to be pretty large classes. So various ways that you have to come at this. It's not one or two things. It's really a holistic view of working together to make sure. We want very vibrant communities, and Suny and our universities and colleges are a pretty big part of it, but they are not the only piece of it. Right.
Fair. Do you want to open up to a few questions, Wen?
Yeah, I think we have time for just a couple of questions.
All right,
Let's see
let's
if
see
anyone
who's
in the
out there with a
audience-
question.
Maybe somebody start with a softball.
All right, we have one in the back.
I have a question just about kind of what you would recommend as the pathway to kind of create those partnerships. Is it typically an HR department or a manager who kind of raises their hand and says, I need this pipeline, how do we partner with a local college or university? And then who at those institutions would they kind of go to start having those conversations?
It's a great question.
I'll flip the question a little bit and then I'll try to answer it. If you're going to a business and it's Walmart or it's a local hardware store or a mid-size, right, international company, you're going to have different ways into that company, right? So it's not always the same answer. So I think a lot of it is just, as you know, from a university perspective or a system perspective, is just to start to make phone calls, right? President is probably not the right place to start. Probably starting with either a public relations arm or the deans, I think is going to have the best piece, because they're going to be more, the public relations is going to know what's going on across the whole university, and the deans are going to know what's going on within the school, right?
And I would say, if it is, most colleges and universities, they do have an, what is the word, educational,
Career services.
They definitely, many of our campuses, they have career services, but in continuing education, I was just looking, these two, continuing education and workforce and career fair, that's it. So these two would be good start, but I would say if you don't get response, deans are always a good bet. And if they don't respond, go to the provost,
And then the dean will respond.
and then the dean will respond to you.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Appreciate that. Great conversation. Thank you for the question. Wen?
This was terrific. These have been really some fantastic conversations. Shadi, Len, thank you for your perspectives. Boy, I will tell you, we have talk about micro-credentialing. I think we have micro-credentialed the audience today based on the conversations that we've had, and really opened up some terrific conversations. So thank you. I think all too often we don't see our institutions of higher ed as the partners that they really are, and so thank you for showing the flag on behalf of the publics and the privates, and helping our audience recognize that there are connections that we can and that we should be making. So thank you one and all. We're not quite done with you yet. Now is your opportunity to really jump in and participate. We have talked about education, we have talked about industry, we have talked about government. We're now going to break in for our last hour into 3 working groups. We'll let you decide where you want to be based on your interest. Pierre Morceau, George Gomez, and Rena Hart. One group, raise your hands. The one group team, who are really terrific folks in the benefit and insurance space, are going to talk about the role of employee benefits and HR policies in attracting and keeping the workforce that you seek. We're calling this one Becoming an Employer of Choice. I would encourage those of you who are looking for some of those strategies, we're going to have that conversation here in this room. Melinda Mack, you got a taste of Melinda earlier. There's more where that came from, which is always fantastic. Melinda will be leading the discussion on overcoming some of the challenging worker retention issues. And I think, if you didn't get it before, Melinda is a terrific connector to some of the programs and policies in your region. Now would be a terrific time to connect with her around those issues. She's going to be upstairs in the Capitol room. And then least, but certainly not least, Alex Steele from Regeneron. Alex is, for those of you who have not met him, you need to meet Alex Steele, because Regeneron really has one of the premier internship and pipeline designed programs of any company, certainly in New York, and I think really in the country. They are a place where certainly a lot of our workers want to be, and I think there's a lot to learn from their programs. And so Alex will be leading the discussion on internships and apprenticeships and some pipeline issues upstairs in the Highland Library. So if you are going upstairs to the Highland Library or to the Capitol room, you have two choices. You can take either the elevator or the staircase. If you take the staircase, we have Salim with his burner phone, so I'm trying to figure out who's he. If you take the staircase, do not take this first staircase, but walk past the registration desk and one flight up, you'll see we have some banners. That will conclude our program. I do want to encourage all of you to continue the discussion, continue the conversation. You will get some follow-up from us with some contact information from some of the other participants and attendees today. Again, as I often say, one of the things that I do not do enough of is to help make some of those direct connections. So if there are folks that you either met with today and didn't get a chance to connect with, or if there are resources or programs that we can help connect you to, I would encourage you to pick up your phone, pick up the email, give me a shout, and we will make those connections. This has been terrific, so thank you one and all. I appreciate your time.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
You're a little bit of MedTech swag.
I love it.
This was a Thank you so much. Try your